This video is part of the GRESB Assessment Training Program. It will cover how to complete the Fund Assessment Management component using the GRESB Assessment Portal. Prior to following this lesson, we recommend that you complete the lessons Fund Assessment Structure and Fund Assessment Entity and Reporting Characteristics. This lesson is the first part of the training on the Fund Assessment Management component and covers the introduction to the fund management component and the aspects leadership and policies. For training covering aspects reporting, risk management, and stakeholder engagement, see the Fund Assessment Management component Part 2. In this lesson, we will introduce the Fund Assessment Management component and describe its aspects and their scoring weightings. Next, we'll go through indicators aspect by aspect, providing guidance and examples of how to report on each indicator in the assessment portal. After this lesson, we recommend that you follow the lesson on the Fund Assessment Management component Part 2. Let's walk through the introduction, the aspect, and weightings. As a reminder, the GRESB Infrastructure Fund Assessment consists of a management component and a performance component. This lesson focuses on the management component, which looks at management and processes and is reported at the organizational level of the fund. The management component consists of 5 aspects: leadership, policies, reporting, risk management, and stakeholder engagement. It is composed of 22 indicators, here represented by the green circles, 16 of which are scored indicators. Viewed in terms of scoring weightings, the management component comprises 30% of the total GRESB score of a fund, with the remaining 70% derived from the GRESB scores of the fund's underlying assets. The risk management aspect, at 11.8%, has the highest aspect weighting, followed by leadership at 6.7%. The first aspect of the management component is leadership. This aspect evaluates how the fund integrates ESG into its overall business strategy. The first indicator of this aspect is on ESG leadership commitments. An entity applying ESG leadership standards or principles publicly demonstrates its commitment to ESG, uses organizational standards and/or frameworks that are universally accepted, and may have obligations to comply with these standards and/or frameworks. The question for this indicator asks, has the entity made a public commitment to ESG standards or principles? As with all indicators, you then have the option of selecting yes or no. If yes is selected, a nested question appears requiring the participant to state whether the commitment they have made covers general ESG issues, like the UN Global Compact, or is specific to a particular environmental, social, or governance issue, like the Science-Based Targets Initiative. Once a participant selects if the commitment is general or specific, another nested question appears, which categorizes commitments as either obliging the organization to take action or not obliging the organization to take action. Commitments that do not oblige action are more aspirational, like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. More points are awarded to commitments that oblige action. This indicator is worth 1.1 points. Evidence is required for this indicator, which will also be validated. A validator will check whether the commitments selected exist in the evidence provided. If the entity participated last year, the indicator will pre-fill with last year's commitments. In this case, review the response and/or evidence carefully because circumstances may have changed. As for all indicators, a context box is provided at the end of each indicator should the entity wish to provide more context to investors or fund managers reviewing the entity's report. This is optional and for reporting purposes only. The second indicator is on responsible investment strategy and asks the question, does the entity have a responsible investment strategy? Alignment with standardized responsible investment strategies provides valuable benchmarking information to investors. If the entity has a responsible investment strategy that applies to the fund, then select Yes. Nested questions will appear. If it does not, select No. The strategies listed are based on the Global Sustainable Investment Association, GSIA, which has standardized 7 sustainable investment strategies. These have emerged as a global standard of classification. This indicator is worth 1.5 points. Evidence is required for this indicator. It is validated to check whether the strategies have been formally adopted by the fund and that they've been implemented. If the entity participated last year, the indicator will pre-fill with last year's strategies. In this case, review the response and/or evidence carefully because circumstances may have changed. Having personnel dedicated to ESG issues increases the likelihood that the entity's ESG objectives will be properly managed and the targets will be met. So the next indicator addresses whether there is an individual responsible for ESG and/or climate-related objectives. Select the type of role assigned the main responsibility for ESG for the entity. Is it a dedicated employee with ESG as their core responsibility? An employee where ESG is amongst their responsibilities? An external consultant? Or someone from a partner organization? The most points are earned for the first option, with a consultant earning the least points. Provide the full name and job title of the individual responsible for ESG. This indicator is subject to automatic validation via a check that the name and job title are completed. It does not require evidence. The second part of the indicator, individual responsible for climate-related objectives, is not scored. The following indicator covers whether there is a senior decision maker for ESG. Having senior management dedicated to ESG increases the likelihood that the objectives will be met. A structured process to keep the most senior decision maker informed on the entity's ESG performance increases accountability and encourages continuous improvement. The indicator has a structure similar to the previous one, so we won't go over it in any more detail. The next indicator in the leadership aspect asks, does the entity include ESG factors in the annual performance targets of personnel? This indicator intends to identify whether, and to what extent, ESG issues are addressed in personnel performance targets. Incentives like performance targets have been shown to increase the entity's capacity to improve ESG performance. The indicator is looking for targets to be in place and that they have real consequences, either financial or non-financial. It also looks at who the targets and consequences apply to. More points are earned for consequences that are financial. This indicator is subject to manual validation, and validators will review the evidence to confirm that targets exist, that there are consequences, and that these apply to the personnel identified. The second aspect of the management component is policies. This aspect evaluates whether policies that apply to the fund and its activities have been formally adopted, and whether these cover the different E, S, or G pillars. The first indicator covers environmental policies. If you select Yes to this indicator, your policy should abide by the following requirements. First, the policy is a formal document that is in place and not simply a list of general goals and/or commitments. Second, the policy specifically addresses the environment or at least one environmental issue. For example, a policy on issues such as energy or air pollution. Third, the policy has been in place during the reporting year and applicable to the reporting entity. And fourth, the policy applies at the entity level. If the policy is set at the group and/or manager level, then reference must be provided to verify applicability to the reporting entity. Note that this indicator is not subject to manual or automatic validation. The next two indicators in the policies aspect apply the exact same approach, but cover social and governance policies. Thank you for taking the time to complete this lesson. We hope that it helped you get a better understanding of the GRESB Infrastructure Fund Assessment and prepared you to complete the assessment accurately. The next lesson, Infrastructure Fund Assessment Management Components Part 2, covers the other aspects of the fund management component: reporting, risk management, and stakeholder engagement. For any questions, you can contact us at gresb.com/contact.